I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, and I'm delighted to have four of the best composers in the world talking to me today about their beautiful work on their films. I've got Emilie Levienaise-Farrouch, who composed the music for Living, Mychael Danna, who composed the music for Where the Crawdads Sing, Danny Elfman, who composed the music for White Noise, and of course, the composer from Women Talking, Hildur Guðnadóttir. Everybody, welcome. My first question is a slightly tricky one. So we'll see how you go. A film is often most effective and potent as an art form when it makes us feel something. Obviously, that's what we're all desperate for when we immerse ourselves in these films. Joy, fear, sadness. What are some of the ways that a good score can really elicit a certain emotional response that you're looking for? What instruments do you turn to, or what tempo or style do you tend to gravitate towards? And let's start with you, Emilie.
I think the best way to elicit a feeling to the audience is to try to understand and feel that emotion yourself when you're writing. I think rather than trying to manipulate people, it's just really emphasizing with the characters and what you're trying to express. And then one of the talent we have as musicians is expressing things without words. So once you feel that emotion, you can express it through music, and hopefully the audience is going to, connect that emotion that you felt when you were writing it. So it's not necessarily an instrument or a strategy, it's just an honesty in your writing process, I would say.
Yeah, and you've said, Emilie, in the past, Mychael, you repeated that sometimes it's really important to kind of bypass brain and go from heart straight to kind of fingers or eyes and into the music themselves. Mychael, so do you believe that's the best way for you to elicit emotion in a score?
Yeah, and that's a whole other interesting point of discussion, the kind of the collaboration between mental and the heart, or whatever is deeper in the life source in all of us, that is where probably the true music comes from, but then we have our mind to kind of help organize it and shape it. And that's something I think as you're writing, you're constantly, and it sounds like all of us, it's very interesting listening to everybody. Everyone had kind of different places where they fall on that spectrum. For me personally, I'm all about the concept, and so I guess I tend towards a more intellectual side of things. I think things through, and for me, I would say that what I try to do to have an effective score is to sometimes do the opposite, or at least a paradoxical, some perpendicular point of view to the story. And I find that that's a thing that viewers, at whatever level of musicality they're at, they can't help but kind of, in the way subconscious, try to unpuzzle that. Like, what is this music doing here? Why is it doing that? And if your concept is good and it's saying something that's actually important, I find that that's something that can stick in people's mind over days after, and they kind of work it out, and it's just something that bubbles underneath. So sometimes doing what's not expected can actually draw you in and make you engage you more as a viewer and listener.
Wow. Danny, what about you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Just studying film music for the last 90 years, my feeling is that the only rule about what you just said, what's emotional, is that there's absolutely no rule. It depends on the world that you're existing in, because there's going to be a world you're going to enter, and it's going to be a traditional period, and it's going to call for a more traditional orchestral sound or using strings, and there's going to be another world where it's going to be absolutely the opposite. One of the favorite scores of my own the last 10 years was a thing called End of the Tour, and it was just piano harmonics and a single bell. But certainly I've written many lush orchestral scores, but if the framework requires that, and I think, as Mychael said, sometimes you want to be against the direction of where it is. I know when I was doing Silver Lining Playbook, it was a romance, but I used Beach Boy style vocals and stuff in a weird way that as Mychael was saying, was kind of playing against the feel of what I thought was obvious. But there's other romantic, emotional movies I've done where I felt like, no, this should be a traditional orchestral string sound for just because of the framework that it's in. So every single film is its own universe. I'm sure Mychael and everybody would agree. And the only common rules are that there are no rules, because what makes something emotional is so subjective. There's no way to say, you ask normal people out there, oh, what's a big emotional score? And they'll say John Williams, E.T., or Ennio Morricone's, Once Upon a Time in America. But that's just two famous scores. There's a million examples of things that are wonderfully emotional that have hardly anything going on in it, or something that's so counterintuitive to what they thought should be emotional, and yet somehow it works. And I think the key is somehow it works. And that's every composer's task, is to find that somehow thing. But there's just absolutely no rules, I think.
Yeah, I love that somehow it works. I suppose you do have to feel it yourself. It is very subjective, as Emilie says. You've got to feel it yourself, otherwise it's you. I mean, how do you know whether anyone else is going to feel it? Hildur, what do you feel? What do you feel or think about this particular topic?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what Danny was saying. I think that's exactly the, that's kind of like where you start. Like, what is the story? Like, where does it happen? What's happening? What's the general mood of the story? And then I think you have to realize, like, where does the music live within that story? Like, how can music or sound best serve the story, and where are the emotional highlights or low points where the music can live? Then you work towards these points and with whatever instrumentation or sound world that serves the story. And I think that's the beauty of films, is that every story is so different. You have like literally every story under the sun,
exactly.
being told in film, and that's what makes it so great, because you can do all these things that you can't do in reality. You can invent all these things that don't even exist. And that's what's so wonderful about it. And they're all their own personal emotional landscapes, and I think that you just try to find the best way for music to elevate that process, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. For film lovers and nerds like myself, and probably the four of you, composers on a film are like, I must say, kind of like the rock stars, because we care about the actors, the directors, the writers, but many of us are obsessed with who's scoring the film and what that score is going to sound like. I'm curious to know what you all feel about some of the scores that you most love, that you've listened to in the past. I was having this debate with our managing director, Chris Beecham, offline about what are the greatest composers of all time. And you can either look at it, as what Danny was saying, the big scores that everyone talks about, or maybe there's those smaller ones that you listen to all the time in the car in your headphones. I'm curious what you all think about that. What do you point to as scores that you adore, that you listen to a lot, and that inspire you? Who would like to pipe in first? That's a difficult one. No pressure, no judgment. But I mean, I could be here all day, boring you to death with the scores that I love, but I won't do that. And some of them scores that some of you have created. So who would like to regale us with their choices? Mychael, I'm kind of looking at you.
Well, I'll be honest, and I'd be curious to see if this is something in common with everyone else. I almost never listen to scores. I actually, the music choices, when I'm listening to music, I usually listen to things that are far away from what I do, things that are in other areas of music that are completely not what I do whatsoever. And in a way, I can draw from that. If I listen to scores from my other three friends here, it might start to get confused in my head, or I might, I don't know. I don't want to be influenced by what other people are doing. Of course, I hear them in the context of the films, which I do watch.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So
I
and by
would
the way,
echo what Mychael is saying exactly.
Yeah. You don't want to be you don't want to be influenced or have any of anyone else's work kind of infiltrate what your creative process. I kind of understand that.
I mean, like what Mychael is saying, I frequently will want to listen to something quite the opposite
Yes.
of what I'm working on to get my head out of that when I'm done working,
Well, then,
like, as Mychael was explaining so beautifully. It's like,
how about when you were what about when you were growing up, or when you were first starting out and you weren't necessarily a composer? What are the scores that you point to that you still think are really great works from the past?
Well, I started out as a film music nerd fan. So I was a fan that became a composer rather than studying for composition. So I was one of those kids that could tell you different, I'd hear a score and I could tell you who it was most of the time. But, for me, it was definitely Bernard Herrmann, and then Jerry Goldsmith, the really eclectic. I loved how eclectic they were, and how Bernard Herrmann could go from comedy to drama to romance to Hitchcock. So I grew up on the classic stuff, and a lot of Morricone and Nino Rota, and but Goldsmith was a hero, and Bernard Herrmann was a hero, and Max Steiner was a hero, and Korngold for me.
Okay. What about you, Emilie?
I'm just going to mention the first score that when I saw a movie, it kind of hit me that there is music and the music can be amazing, and that would be Vangelis' score for Blade Runner. I think I was a preteen, and it was it just blew my mind, because it was so different from anything else I'd heard before, and it was just so much a part of that world.
I would second that also.
So beautiful.
Yeah. I'm hearing it right now. It's it's a great, beautiful piece.
Both melodic, but also evocative, and it gets under your skin, which is what we all hope our scores will do, is get under your skin.
And the sound world was just so different. Like the sounds themselves, I'd never heard sounds like that as like a kid. It was just so unique. It just really opened my horizon.
Yeah,
for sure.
And innovative. What about you, Hildur?
I think the first score that I remember as a kid was probably Twin Peaks. It's just such a wonderful.
Mark Snow, I think that is.
Yeah. Sorry?
Mark Snow is the composer, or was it? I can't remember.
No.
Badalamenti.
Oh, the Badalamenti, of course. Sorry, my apologies.
And I think that's the first score that I remember being just like totally blown away, and I just remember being so absolutely blown away by this film. I just couldn't believe it.
I would second that one too.
It was just so,
for me right now.
Yeah, it was so wonderful, and I think probably the second like score that I remember moving me in a completely, absolutely different way, but in such an emotional way, was probably Cinema Paradiso, the Morricone score. I just remember seeing that also as a young person, and just being so unbelievably moved by his melodies, and that was continued to be moved by all of his score and his whole career. So but in general, I think in later days, like I also second, I don't really listen much to film music or music that's kind of in the same line of sonic landscape as my own. Like I luckily my son keeps me pretty occupied with his latest pop playlist. So I normally listen mostly to like Justin Bieber and Billie Eilish at home.
That sounds like my house. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
If we talk about first film scores that really, the one that made my ears perk up as a kid is Ben-Hur. And the reason is that there were those Eastern modalities that I'd never heard before, and the diminished second and all these kind of Middle Eastern tonalities that were just in there. And I remember running to the piano and going, what is that? Like, how did you get that feeling, that sound? That's the first score that grabbed my interest as a kid.
I would agree. Ben-Hur and Spartacus, oddly, was another one that Alex North did. I thought was like, wow, it's so dense.
Yeah. There's some great and just the sonorities, and it just built a whole other world sonically.
Well, not to mention, Mychael, they had whole 10-minute, 15-minute intermission music as part of the scores. Like,
can you imagine?
For like 50 minutes. Oh my God.
I can hear it in my head right now that I love that intermission music. Still do. Wow. Sadly, we were all born a few years too late for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. I wish they'd bring it back.
Oh my God.
On that note, I will leave you to a permanent intermission on this panel. That was my best attempt at a play on words. Thank you all so much for joining us today. All 4 of these scores was just such a pleasure to be able to listen to, and congratulations on some beautiful work, and good luck this award season.
Thanks, Robert.
Great to meet everyone.
Thank you.